Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll wait another moment or two for folks to join in. Okay, I don't see anybody else trying to come on, so I think we can go ahead and get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to do a quick check. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm seeing a thumbs up. Excellent. Thank you. So let's go ahead and get started. We usually dedicate a few minutes at the beginning to run the kind of facilitator process piece by Sam to make sure that we're on the right track. Sam, is there anything you wanted to include as a subcommittee task or process protocols and goals today?
I mean, I think the only thing that's missing from your work product to date is a 10 to 15 page summary about how much you love the facilitator. I think that adding that particular piece to the document would just make it sing. But other than that, no.
I'd only be able to contribute about 2 sentences towards that, but I'll give it my best shot.
Thanks, John.
I might be able to do a couple,
Yeah.
a couple characters maybe. So
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you. So with that, I think that's a good segue into speaking to some of the deliverables for the work group report. I think we touched on it last time, but I just wanted to double check. In our last meeting, we briefly discussed the format of targeting some key findings and key recommendations in the work that we're doing to include in the work group document. I'm seeing some nods. I just wanted to make sure that we have that covered and that expectation is there. Any questions around kind of identifying these key findings and key recommendations in the work that we've done so far? Hey, Ken. All right, so let's just keep that in mind today. I am still working on putting that sort of initial draft of that work together from what we've already done and sending it over to Sam to include in the next draft number 2, which it will be the full work group report draft. I will include that on the webpage. So folks, if you want to review that, please go through, let me know if there's any key findings or key recommendations that should be added or changed. Just let me know, but I'll do my best to get what we have so far updated on there. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into our current document that we've been working from. This is on the draft, it's called the draft subcommittee recommendations document. It is on the website currently, and I was not able to update the latest version, which is essentially my deliverable from last time was to create sort of a list of questions for each major topic, as opposed to, or kind of working in conjunction with the kind of table of contents format that we've been working from, which I've largely done. So I'll include that in the review format today. But just know I will post that right after our meeting so everyone can review that on paper as well. And I'm sorry I couldn't get that posted before our meeting today. Okay. Okay, I just want to double check. Can everyone see my screen? It should start with charge C at the top. Okay, awesome. Thank you. So let's go ahead and scroll down here. We have a couple items that I think we should probably start out with. Let's see here. We have to review a work plan outline with a timeline for completion. And then we wanted to go through key findings and key recommendations, see if we can find any of those in this document so far. And I think that's all I had on my list. I think we can leave some of the question format. I'm going to scroll down to it here. This table of contents, I've gone through and essentially taken some key questions and added it below. I'm sorry about the scrolling. All right, and our list of questions to be answered right here, I've reformatted this. I've made them associated with each section. So we have the questions associated with the introduction, questions associated with climate change, questions associated with life cycle impacts of materials, and so on. So I did my best to capture that so far. I have a tiny bit more work to do on the enforcement section at the bottom. But that's going to be largely an opportunity for us between meetings to be adding to. Okay. Any questions before we move on? So I think I'm going to direct our attention to the timeline for completion piece here. All right. So let's go ahead and scroll down here. Sorry again about all the scrolling. Okay. So last time we talked about this a little bit, but one of the charge elements that we have, let me admit an individual. Okay. So one of the charge elements that we have is a work plan outline for a timeline with a timeline for completion. So I mentioned how I spoke with Sam, the facilitator, about this a little bit more because we had left off previously essentially wanting more guidance on what this entails. And the answer is essentially a timeline for all aspects of the completion of this work, from the RFP process perspective all the way through the actual completion of the work, the actual completion of the plan. And I think that's where we left off last time. So I just wanted to pick it up here. I didn't receive any detailed comments for this section from folks between meetings, but I wanted to open up the room. Do we have any thoughts on sort of elements of timelines, especially when we're talking about things like, you know, how long the RFP should be available to be responded to, for instance? I think that's something that we can weigh in on, things like that. There are obviously some standards and best practices associated with all of these elements that I can try my best to bring in here. And I know we have a lot of expertise in the room as well on this. But any thoughts or areas we wanted to start out with when we're talking about a timeline for completion associated with the RFP process or the work? Yeah, Brian.
So do you have contracting standards, I mean, within the county, of requirements of minimum times for posting or anything that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. I know that we have RFP requirements, certainly, but nothing specifically that will kind of provide a very specific guideline to these elements here. I've reviewed some RFPs that the county has released in the past, and I've noticed, for instance, that a month time frame that from the release date to the expected delivery of applications, it seems to be the timeline, but it doesn't seem like that's set in stone. But if that's helpful, I'm not an RFP expert, so all of this could be run by our finance team as well.
Group. Yeah. Usually for something like that, we would do at least 4 weeks, so a full month. to kind of let it be out there because of, depends on the detail required. And I'm assuming there's going to be quite a bit of detail that you're going to want to have.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. And John.
I am not sure about the length of time. 4 weeks seems reasonable. We may want to allow a little more time. I think, there's two ways to look at this. One is working backwards from a date or time in the future that the commissioners and the county would like to have a contractor started, and then a finished product from that contract, from that consultant. So we could look at it that way, or we could build from today or from the completion of the work group's work and build it on that. So that's two thoughts there. One element that I think needs to be added is a proposal. What do we call it? I haven't done RFPs since my days with Norfolk, but it was where the prospective proposers got to come in and ask questions and clarifications of things that were in the request for proposal, and the appropriate people were there to provide answers, which get published, and and those then get released. Brian, you might be able to be familiar with that too.
Yeah, actually, that was going to be my suggestion too, is that very early in that, whatever that period is to provide that opportunity, because that is really beneficial. Because then that's shared with all prospective bidders, and yeah, and then you can even make it required, which is usually a good thing, because then you get a feel for who's really going to be interested in your RFP.
Thank you both. Excellent. So I'm tracking this correctly, is the idea to have that obviously before the RFP is released, essentially, or is that after the RFP is released?
I would do it after you release it. Yeah.
Because you want them to have a good look at it.
Yep.
And then you get it weeds out those that are not that serious about it. Some will come and they might get clarification enough to know that they don't want to submit, which saves them time and us time. But the serious ones will ask good questions. Yeah.
And so this would fall if there were a 4-week timeline between the RFP release date and the application deadline. Sometime early on in that period, there'd be this Q&A opportunity, potentially a requirement for folks who are interested in applying to come and ask questions and learn more about the expectations.
Right.
Excellent.
Yeah, typically for us, we'd have, contracts rep there, and then probably your project manager to try to, you could be also already have questions that have come in from prospective, bidders, where you could be able to field it to everybody at that time.
Excellent. So we have Ryan's hand.
Yeah, so just I agree. If at least 4 weeks, definitely need to have a mandatory. We call it like it's not a pre-RFP, pre-bid or whatever pre-meeting. The nice part from a contractor's or respondent's perspective, if it's mandatory, then who's going to be there, who your competition is. Again, I'm looking at it through the like a respondent's lens, and so that's a very helpful thing versus going at it blind. And then also, as Benton County also has a good sense of the level of interest. Mm-hmm. Depending upon how detailed the ask is, 4 weeks may be a little bit light. I think that someone needs to define also when there's going to be presentations and interviews. Depending upon the magnitude as far as what the deliverable is, we've seen in the past where on substantial projects, they will shortlist it, so everyone turns in an RFP, the review committee shortlists it, And then the 2 or 3 shortlisted firms are basically awarded another month, and then like $5,000 or $10,000 with which to prepare a presentation. It really depends upon the strategy. That dollars doesn't even touch the amount of effort that the firms will put into it, but it just kind of it's a really a 2-step process. Something for folks to consider. Again, you don't have to put dollars towards it, but depending upon the level of ask that's being put out there, as far as what is the committee wanting to see, as far as how much mental effort and deliverables do they need to put in there. These teams are going to get together, or these respondents are going to get together and spend hours in a room figuring out how to address this. And so throughout this whole process, the county will gain a lot of insight from all the different respondents as well. So there's a real education piece that comes out of that. Even if you don't pick respondent B and you go with respondent D, there's information that comes forth. So just some food for thought.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ryan. That's really helpful. So I was jotting this down. Essentially, you have the RFP response deadline. Maybe it's 4 weeks, maybe it's longer, kind of depending on what we talk about the scope being. And then some firms would be shortlisted from that product, from those applicants. And then those shortlisted firms would be given an additional amount of time and potentially funding to put together a more detailed presentation.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, and again, funding is totally optional at the discretion of the county, but it really depends upon the level of ask that's out there. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Ryan. And Sam.
So related to this topic is oftentimes governmental entities will have, when the RFP is sent out, you have to express interest. And you have to express interest as a prime or a sub. And the benefit of that is, there could be some proposers that have in-house all of the subject matter experts that we are asking for in this RFP. Some of them may not have to create a team. And so if they say subcontractor, and I'm just making this a geologist, subcontractor recycling, that way then the primes can pull into their team missing experts to give the holistic picture. And it also is a equitable thing from sometimes the subs are smaller and would otherwise be not competitive, but if they have this access to the primes, then they have a shot at getting a piece of the business, which I think is a good thing, but it's all obviously up to you all.
Thank you, Sam. I wanted to briefly note here as well. I think being realistic with the ask, the list of topics and the scope of this work, I've read a lot of these documents from all across the country and the world, and the amount of work being proposed in this document far outweighs anything I've come across so far in all of my research. So putting that scope and keeping that in mind when we're talking about this RFP development, I think is really helpful. So all the kind of pieces of adding elements to this process that will help develop the best applicants or firms possible to do this work, given that massive scope. I think that's really important. So I just wanted to call that out and kind of recognize the amount going into that, the amount of the ask, and also the kind of creativity and beneficial aspects of keeping that in mind. So thank you all for already contributing some of that. Ken.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in what I've seen is with the RFP release announcement, there is the announcement of a webinar So an opportunity for basically the releasers of the RFP to interact live with people and field questions and make a presentation that way. And that way you can get an early read essentially on who's out there, how interested they are, what questions they have. And especially kind of given what you just said about the possibility that this is kind of daunting. I think right now we're looking at something which has a lot of stuff in it because we're charged to be complete, but I'm not sure that we've prioritized things in a way that would be most helpful to someone responding to an RFP.
Thank you, Ken. And for the webinar concept to field questions, interact live, make a presentation, would this tie in or be in addition to the sort of pre-proposal Q&A opportunity?
Well, I'm assuming that what was talked about in the pre-proposal is something which is done like via email, where you send in a list of questions, or there's a website where that's handled or something like that. I don't know if they're really talking about, if we were really talking about having something live, but it just having that live, it just introduces that additional element. So it'd be kind of the same, but it's what I've seen is it's part of the actual launch of the RFP itself.
Got it.
So it's announced that the RFP is coming up. It's announced that there's a webinar like that.
Excellent. Thank you, Ken. And Brian.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to kind of touch base on what Sam had mentioned too about the idea of the subcontractors. And I think that's something you want to put in the RFP, that you're going to kind of have that expectation is it's going to be more of a team than any one specific firm. And then as you have read through, Daniel, a whole bunch of these types of respondents, the idea and the intent is actually to put bumpers on how big a proposal that can come in, just for the sake of your poor, review committee that's going to go through all these proposals, that you don't want 200-page documents, because some companies will put a lot more stuffing into it. And if you can make them just be as concise as possible, I would recommend that too.
Thank you, Brian. And Sam.
3 quick points. First to Ken's, at least in the world that I have to bid in, there is an opportunity for Q&A by email, and there is this pre-bid meeting, which is what you were talking about, that gives the cocktail party overview of what we're looking at and asks technical questions, and so that everyone is on the same page. Second point is that you all might want to consider suggesting that this RFP contain a section that's frequently called nowadays corporate responsibility, social responsibility, equity and inclusion, and various combinations thereof. And so in the point systems, you can say you get X number of points if you utilize MWESB subcontractors in and around the state. You get X number of points if you have sustainable business practices in your own business. So you can put forth county values as evaluation criteria and ask them to respond. If how many MWESB minority woman-owned emergency small business enterprises are on your team, and what did you do to outreach to get to access to these people from an equity lens? And then the final point I suggest you consider is a couple paragraphs in this document that says you encourage the county to have members of this subcommittee or members of the work group, however you want to frame it, on the subsequent post Benton County Tox Trash literal development of the RFP and on the screening committee or evaluation committee, or, whatever it gets called, so that your input just doesn't die on March, whatever the hell date is, we're submitting our last report, but carries on through the creation of this RFP and the selection of the ultimate consultant. So 3 points that I think, you should at least consider. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. I jotted some of these notes down here in the timeline section. I'm going to transpose them to other sections of this document for later on, but if you don't see it in the next version, it's probably somewhere else, but I just wanted to keep track of it here without losing it. So John.
Two elements that I think need to be considered is the distribution of the RFP. I think we need to allow enough time for us, the county, to make sure that the RFP is posted on relevant trade documents or trade publications, and is speaking to equity, making sure it gets in communities that may not always be on the radar of the basic publications. But I mean, I know there's some standards for that, and you've got to post it for a certain amount of time. But I just think we need to be very thorough, since we've been looking at international firms as well as national firms. And then the second element is just, this is really not a time related thing, but it's I can't recall how transparency to the public, and when typically these processes go on quite a bit without release, but I certainly will stand corrected on that and how it's done now, but I wanted to just throw that out there to everyone to see what your thoughts are on that as far as transparency. And when the RFPs are presented, or how that works.
So John, just so I'm tracking, the transparency piece is essentially like the transparency of communicating with the public, the kind of the various steps of the process and making that information accessible.
Yeah, I mean, basically, there'll be awareness certainly that the RFP is released, and then it's going to go underground. It could go underground for quite a while before anything is decided. And I don't know, when when certain information can be released, when it's appropriate, when it's effective. But I think we're all leaning to trying to be as transparent as possible.
Thank you. All right, Sam.
With regard to that point, I recommend you read the section of the report that you'll have before the next meeting. Subcommittee E marches on that. They have put together recommended notification timeliness and sources for communication of all of these issues. One of the major criticisms that I heard about in my assessment was not knowing. So I'll, for shorthand, using your term, lack of transparency. The charge for Subcommittee E, I intentionally wrote that so that that issue doesn't repeat itself. And if you have time, you can look at their work product and see if you would add anything or subtract something, and maybe in this document cross-reference to Sub E's report on notification, who, when, where. They have things like the radii for various announcements, what have you. And that is another way of these pieces all coming together in the final report. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, really good tie-in with Subcommittee E when we're talking about timelines and communication. I think that's really important to keep in mind. All right, so I had a couple thoughts One is the 4-week timeline that I saw for other RFPs. I've seen it with solid waste management planning RFPs, as well as kind of RFPs in the outside of the solid waste world, but in the sort of government service world. I think 4 weeks has come up, but again, I really want to make sure that an applicant could even kind of go about responding to such a potentially massive work product. And I wanted to pick the group's brains about this 4-week timeline. If it's coupled with an opportunity like shortlisted firms are given more time to do a more detailed dive into the response, I think that could make a lot of sense. But I wanted to kind of get a feeler on how people are thinking about this initial 4-week response period, and if that is long enough. Yeah, Ryan.
Yeah, so typically what I would expect to see is a 4-week response period. A review committee is going to take a couple weeks to go through and shortlist firms and make that announcement. They take anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks to, to basically score and shortlist the top 3, top 5, whatever the cutoff is. And then if it's going to be more than just an interview, meaning if you're going to be asked to prepare a work product, typically you're given an additional, 2 to 3 weeks to prepare it. If it's simply, hey, we want to have everyone come in for an interview, that usually happens within a week's time, and there's not a lot of additional work other than get your team together and come in and get this taken care of.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, I'm just tracking this last note here. Excellent. Thanks, Ryan. Okay, so I think we're making a lot of good progress here. The other piece here is the length of the overall project. Again, I think from communication I've had with other counties that have embarked on kind of major solid waste related planning projects, I think 1 to 2 years is a time frame that I've heard a lot, especially kind of leaning towards the 2-year mark. Most of those counties already have plans that they're updating for those time periods. We do not have a plan that is being updated. So obviously this is, a lot of work from the ground up, as opposed to kind of an update process that other counties might go through. I wanted to kind of see how the group is feeling about the sort of expected length of time. Obviously, I think that's a big, difficult question to ask, but in my mind, I think 2 years is probably what sort of responses we might get when we ask an applicant how long they think it might take to do the work that they're doing. But I wanted to see what the group thought. Yeah, Brian.
So for me, I think a lot of that's going to be defined on, again, that public interaction and the requirements from Benton County. So if you want to hold town halls, you want to have SWAC involved, you want to have these other entities, that's really a lot of the time, as the research and development from the consultants will be kind of in the background, but it's how much of that to make sure to the point that there is that full engagement of the county and the residents and everybody else to partake. That's what really drags that timeline out. Otherwise, I think it can be scrunched. And I think it's also just driven by the county need and how soon do you need to have something in place to address those needs.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I agree. I think from what I've heard, the stakeholder engagement piece and really trying to connect with the community in various ways is the aspect that really makes the length much broader than what might happen on this kind of development side that the contractor is working on. Yeah, Sam.
So on that point, and I apologize, I haven't had time to read this most recent draft, but again, I encourage you to consider putting in a section that lays out some general expectations of what you want to see by way of community involvement and community engagement. And so that the board has a heads up as to what you're looking for. And you can, again, it's all up to you, but you can go so far as to say, and I'm just making this up, at least X number of SWAC DSAC members, at least Y number of people from the work group, at least people that are this work group or public environment should include from all 5 major quadrants or all 4 major quadrants of the county. You can buttress and put in what are your expectations for community involvement, and not just leave it to them. Well, of course, you're going to ask them, what do they conceive as a robust community involvement plan? But I wouldn't be shy about laying out what your expectations are so they know what you're looking for, because that too is going to go into their price bid. If they're having, and I'm making this up, 20 open houses versus 2, it makes a difference in their pricing. And so you could get on the surface, if you're going to evaluate just based on cost, you can get a applicant with a very high price, therefore he, she, or they get a very low score. But they have the reason for that higher price is they have the full meal deal public involvement program that the other team does not have. So you got to be careful when you're doing the price analysis, if it has to be bid on the similar sort of things.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And I think we do have a fair amount of community involvement expectations elsewhere in the document, but if any ideas come up, I'm happy to include them here, and we can find where they're at and make sure they're landing in the right place on this document, and just generally develop those expectations more. And then we also have a couple items here for this sort of proposed SMMP committee meetings. I think the idea for this one would be sort of throughout the development, once the RFP respondent or contractor is chosen, working with a stakeholder committee on getting feedback throughout that work, I think is part of this, as well as meetings with the general public that might not be included in that stakeholder group specifically. So we can think about those and the number of meetings for those as well. Ken.
Yeah, thanks. So this kind of segues into a question that I have, and it's not a question, it's not a subject that I'm very familiar with, but so there are such things as technical advisory committees, and I've kind of, someone mentioned that, yeah, it's very common or it's usual for there to be technical advisory committees, doing, working alongside with the consultants essentially and reviewing the technical specifications. So I'm sorry, I can't really. Because it's a new subject to me, it just seems like that would also be part of the, of this effort, and it would lend, it would indicate, I think, excuse me, it would go to a longer timeline, if indeed there are also advisory committees with people who have technical or legislative expertise, if they're kind of steering committees, working with the consultant.
Thanks,
Does
Ken.
anyone, can anyone fill me in? Probably someone
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, looks like we have Sam.
I can. So on many of the projects I do, there's a TAC, a TAC, Technical Advisory Committee, and a CAC, CAC, Citizens Advisory Committee. So what happens generally is the prime will be doing the deep dives and the digging and the gathering of information, and then vet it with the TAC first, so that they work out, they got common assumptions or disagreements about, we should add this section or that section or the other section, get vetted from a quote unquote technical perspective at the TAC. And then once they, they get it in a place where either they have consensus or they have got it to a place where they've got a bunch of technical agreements on a bunch of topics, but on topics 13, 17, and 19, the TAC can't agree, then those 3 topics go to the CAC and say, all right, Citizens Advisory Committee, here are these 3 issues. The technical experts are not hand in glove. What do y'all think? And then they give feedback to the TAC, and they go back and then, again, move it forward. So absolutely, a TAC and a CAC are the sort of, in these big projects like this will be, are kind of a necessity.
Thanks, Sam. And thank you, Ken. Any other thoughts on this TAC and CAC approach? It'll be a lot of fun to say either way.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I jotted that down here. Yeah, Ken.
Sorry, so I'm just wondering, where is it appropriate? This is the first that's come up right in this subcommittee for me. Of course, there may have been moments when I was, thinking about other things and not paying attention or whatever. So the more general question is, I just don't want that to get lost when we're actually looking at other parts of the document. When we're talking about the public engagement part. But if it's generally understood that that sort of system is going to be set up, it may not be appropriate for this document, which is kind of the vibe I'm getting. But I just wanted to ask the question.
I mean, my understanding from Sam is those kind of recommendations of, this subcommittee would like to see a technical advisory group and a community advisory group handling issues that first vet technical information from the consultant on the technical advisory group side, and then review areas of disagreement that the technical experts engage in. I think that's, from my interaction with Sam, that's within our charge. So we could include that. Yeah, I'm getting a thumbs up. So I think that if we have recommendations on that, we can include that in the document. Probably not in this timeline section, but I'll move it to the right place. Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, sorry, I had to jump off on the phone, but here in Marion County in this process, our board, the Marion County Commissioners, had made an effort to have kind of the draft pieces as the plan is put together go through our solid waste advisory committee, and there was even a subcommittee specific to the management plan, right, that would work with the consultant and vet, and that was in that basically additional public space. And there was always a liaison from the board's office or the board member on the SWAMAC, in a sense, or your SWAC, to kind of look and guide. So when the whole plan came forward, it had not only been vetted kind of through that public arena, but it was coming in chunks to get to that culmination, so that all those, review processes and additional public input could be made. So. And again, that was the discretion of our board to do it in that manner. So again, don't know if that's something that asks yours. And sorry, I got to jump off to go actually meet with my board. So sorry, everybody.
Thank you so much, Brian.
You bet. We'll see you.
So I'm going to jot down the SWAC DSAC concept here as an additional advisory option. And if we have any ideas on how these all come into play, I'm thinking specifically between a community advisory committee, SWAC DSAC, and maybe another SMMP committee. Sam mentioned earlier that maybe members from this group would be part of that, so that this work doesn't get lost. I'm just trying to think about the interplay of these groups and how they might all be related. But any initial thoughts on that? We don't have to have an answer, but just wanted to pose that to the group as we have 3 kind of related advisory options here.
Daniel, just to clarify, I think What I was saying, bring people from this committee forward. That wasn't as a separate group. It would be to be part of the CAC. They would be members of the CAC once the project is up and running. But I also suggested crossover from this group to the next, even in the finalizing the RFP and selecting the consultant phase. So because we have a lot of knowledge and history and good collaboration and then those people that are on, like for instance this committee, when they go to the finalizing the RFP and picking the consultant, they have all that rich context of 6 months or whatever it has or will be of feedback that they can provide to score, because you have a sense and feel of what the community is looking for in these consultants. So, but it's not a separate freestanding committee. It would be ad hoc until you select the person or team, and then the CAC, the recommendation again, if you want it, should be and populate people from ... for the actual doing of the work.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, that was exactly what I was asking about, is how these groups and members might fall into the CAC. So thanks for clarifying that. And I just wanted to note too, the idea is that some CAC representation would be for the RFP development as well as the RFP evaluation. All right, I'm going to just jot that down here before I lose it. Any other thoughts on, the advisory roles that might come into play here? I know we're sort of off topic on the timeline, but I'll find the kind of correct locations for this information on the document. Okay. Well,
So
yeah.
jumping back to the length of time that the consultant would have to produce the report, and I'm wondering about that 2-year figure. I would be interested to know for maybe other counties, other locales that have done this, how long they gave the contractor. We are asking a lot. There's a lot of work here. There's always, I suppose, extensions. If that, I don't know. I'd like to see it happen maybe sooner than 2 years.
Yeah, thanks, John. So just some background on that. I think there's a couple of approaches that I've seen. I believe Deschutes County didn't actually include a timeline that they give the respondent to complete the work, but rather they ask the respondent how much time they need to do the work. So I think there's a couple ways of going about it, but I mainly bring it up because there's obviously going to be that interplay between what the scope is and what the realistic expectation for completion. So I guess the real question here is, when do we need the work product by, if there is a time that we need it by? And I think obviously we're all sort of in the camp of it'd be great to have a work product that we can, or a plan sooner than later. And then kind of what are the costs of that, of shortening that timeline that it might take to have a more robust plan, for example. Sorry to keep your hand up, Sam, go for it.
Thank you. A complementary approach, not in lieu of, but in addition to what you just talked about, is to ask the bidders to say, while we want to have we want to have hear your sense of how long it would take. But tell us what you could do in 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years. And then the beauty of that approach is you get all, I'll make this up, the 5 prime contractors bidding, and they're telling you, here's what you get for 1 year and X thousands of dollars. Here's what you get for 2 years and 2X thousands of dollars, and 3 years, and so on. And that may well also then help you refine and scope. So simultaneously, what you're doing in selecting the successful prime contractor is you are also then have an opportunity to redefine what you want the actual contract to be based on concrete information of what you get, how long it's going to take, and how much it's going to cost. And you may all decide that, oh, well, we thought it was 2 years, but really it's 3 or it's 18 months now. But we have to actually have data that gives us, pick some from column A, B, and column C. So that's another complementary approach. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. That's a really good idea. And you also brought up the kind of notion of going back to the drawing board after you've gotten this information and sort of having that conversation. And that's something else that Deschutes County did take advantage of. They essentially said for the work plan component, while they wanted as detailed a work plan as they could get from a respondent, the idea was that they would select a respondent and then develop that work plan further. And I think that's just something we should keep in mind, that it's not necessarily going to be set in stone based on the initial RFP, but a more open-ended work plan to be developed. John.
Yeah, this is kind of just thinking along those same lines. If there was that kind of gradation of how long it would take our contractor to complete certain things, perhaps part of the proposal development or the contract development could be, well, we would like you to release this report or this part of the report after the first year. And then because that's the most important information we need. And then year 2 would be devoted to these aspects. We'd have to see all that information to make those decisions, but it also would require the county to prioritize perhaps, some of these things in this table of contents, what is most critical for us right now.
Thank you, John. Yeah, and just for context, I think if I understand Lane County's approach correctly, I'm pretty sure that's essentially what they did as well. They broke out their report more or less in 2 chunks and released that initial part and sort of built on the second part. But I think that's definitely an option that's been utilized. So that's a really excellent point here. Any other ideas or thoughts on the timeline, releasing the report in different chunks? Do we like that approach as an option, especially for the longer length timelines to get everything we need covered? I'm seeing some nods. Okay. Excellent. So if we don't have any other thoughts on this timeline section, we could leave it for a little bit more thinking. Yeah, Ken.
My thought here, and of course I know we're thinking about this, but one of the advantages of what Deschutes County did in terms of redoing the work plan, once they had been selected, is it just gives I'm worried that it gives the actual firm that you consult, that you're actually going to work with, some freedom to actually shape their own destiny, which I just know is very important to some firms. I don't want us to be kind of laying obligation upon obligation onto the bidders, especially when they're prospective, they're applicants. Because you can just get people who just go, this is just too much. We're not going to go down this road. We want to work with someone more flexibly. And so looking for those points where it's nice for the county to be to have flexibility at this point, but it's also nice for the applicant to have flexibility at this point. Those seem to me to be kind of win-win. So those, I think, work out well. When I think about, applying for jobs, is certainly something that I would take into consideration.
Thank you, Ken. I'm seeing some applause from Sam there, in agreement. I think that's also something, I think the narrative piece of Deschutes County largely said something along the lines of, we don't know what we don't know. So we don't want to kind of have this too closed off to the opportunities that might develop from reworking this work plan. So I think that was an interesting approach, and I agree. I think that helps keep it more open-ended and the possibilities open, as well as attract this sort of demonstrated flexibility component. All right. Any other thoughts? We can, otherwise we can go on to some other sections here. Okay. Let me go ahead and scroll down. I'm trying to remember where we left off in some of these other components. I know we mentioned last time, essentially including sort of a list of resources, perhaps. And I realized that we do have a section being topics covered in recent similar planning efforts across the state as part of our charge. And we've included a lot of those, whether they're kind of solid waste management plans from other counties or jurisdictions, but we've also included the state plans as well, being the 2050 vision and 2020 framework from DEQ. So I just wanted to note that that's in there as part of our deliverable already. And if there are other state or local documents that you think would be helpful, this is something we can include in this section. And okay, something we haven't developed recently, but I think worthwhile, and I think it's going to, a lot of these are probably going to fall into place in the form of other comments and ideas from this group into other sections, but essentially this lessons learned that should be brought forward in the process. I think I just wanted to highlight this area as another sort of catch all option for maybe things that don't quite fit into other topic areas of the charge, but we want to have captured as it relates to the development of an SMMP or the RFP process. This is a really good opportunity for these lessons learned. And I think, I just wanted to call that out here because if we do have lessons learned that don't quite fit into things like the RFP timeline, for example, maybe we can put them here. We haven't developed this a ton, but we had a decent conversation and got some good thoughts going. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the top of this document. We have about a half an hour total. And then at the end of this session, I just wanted to go through key findings and key recommendations. So maybe 10 or 15 minutes on that. So let's go through this document one more time. I'm going to do a couple big scrolls here. So we have our charge at the top, the first element being contracting out. We have a list of qualities of a successful applicant. I think this is another area that we've captured a lot of really good ideas on what should be considered by the kind of decision-making body for these applicants. And I wanted to open it up to the group if we had any other thoughts on this since last time. Yeah, Ken.
Oh, I just wanted to notice, I think long bullet lists where things are really undifferentiated just kind of make my skin crawl a little bit. So I really appreciated what you did with the list of questions where you began to organize them, you know, in a way. And I think that's really important for kind of giving context to, you know, these poor applicants who are trying to meet all of these qualifications. I know we had kind of talked about that before, but I look forward to that happening essentially in this section in particular.
I agree. I think that would be, you know, it could easily be divided up into 2 or 3 maybe 3 or 4 categories. There is a lot here. Sam, remind me of what homework we gave the larger group. Didn't we ask them to review this? You know, I sacrificed keeping them there for another hour of my report for our group, and I just can't remember if this is what it was. Do you recall? And I noticed that the agenda and minutes just went out for our next group meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer that from 2 perspectives. One is the practical. I think between now and Tuesday at noon, when I need to have all this stuff to mush together to send out the work group, all of these subcommittee reports, it's better to have more content that you all are happy with than the stylistic editing communication piece, which we can refine between now and when the Planning Commission, SWAC, DSAC does their work. But yes, absolutely. In most RFPs for this kind of work, you generally see, here's how we want your RFP to respond to 5 categories. And here are those categories, you know, background and experience of the firm, proposed approach, qualifications in the areas, cost, and whether or not you are doing social responsibility, equity and inclusion, however you want. Each of those categories, then you have those 5 categories. You would take that long laundry list of bullets, and then you would put them, each of those bullets, under one or more of those 5 categories. So they're all related qualifications are in one place. And then you would say category, and I'm just making stuff up. Category 1 is 10%. Category 2, topic 2, your approach to the problem is 30%. Price is, you know, 5%, you know, whatever value judgment you make. But yes, those bullets, time permitting, would really be benefit from organizing it into that hierarchical structure.
Thanks, Sam. And John, I don't recall specifically if the work group is going to be trying to add to this list or not. I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, it was really just instead of just reviewing all of that at that meeting, we gave them the opportunity to review this and provide some feedback. That might come maybe at the meeting coming up or not, but I think we're happy with it. It's, you know, except for the maybe, you know, reorganizing it part.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, only 3 members had sufficient time to comment on the rough draft report. And I totally get it because everyone is so darn busy and it's a big document. But as I recall, no one of the 3 commentators, no one spoke to this particular point of your section of the report.
And to Ken's point and John's point, I'm going to go through and try my best to organize some of this document at the very least for us, but also for, the drafts. We're essentially going to be including a lot of this material in the work group draft, whether they fall into the form of key findings and key recommendations, or they're just in the attached version of this longer document at the end. But I totally agree. I think organizing it will help readability and understandability here. So I'll do my best. And I think we sort of had a good segue based on Sam's feedback. And we briefly reviewed this last week and got some good ideas, but we drag and dropped or cut and pasted a couple concepts from Deschutes RFP, which I included as a link here as well. And essentially the format and content piece, what are the informational sort of deliverables of a respondent? Like what information do we need to be reviewing to understand what they're gonna be able to do for this work? And then what are the selection criteria? And then how are they weighted, especially in regards to one another? So how, I think last time we got the idea that, cost is important, but not necessarily the number one item. So that's the sort of content that I think if we want to spend 10 minutes or so right now thinking about and discussing more, both filling in kind of what do we see as the deliverables that will help us choose an applicant, and then also how do we select them, and what are their criteria. Do we have any thoughts here? I can start up top with the proposal content piece, and that was kind of the list of items that Sam mentioned earlier. We have a cover letter, team experience and qualifications, references, experiences. Also, just so you know, all of these have little descriptors in Deschutes County's RFP that I didn't include here for space purposes, but if we need to reference those, we can. Understanding of project approach to the scope of work, and then project schedule. Ryan.
Yeah, so as I look at this order A through G, just one comment. I would be curious to see if we'd want to move references to the end, just because that's typically when I respond to RFPs, it's usually at the end. You fill in references at the end. And then we talk about cost, but where are we looking for basically the cost of in here? We've got approach and project schedule, but we probably need to put some sort of, and on that, do we want to provide some sort of cost matrix, or do we leave it completely open-ended to the respondents? And so I guess that's a question for the group.
Yeah, I think we got the comment earlier from Brian that maybe a cost matrix and really kind of just putting sidebars on the length of document even could be helpful. So I can imagine that might be helpful piece here, but anybody else have thoughts on that?
I'm in agreement that we need some kind of matrix.
Excellent. Yeah, Ken.
Well, I'm just in agreement that putting a parameter around perhaps each of these items, just in terms of how long it is a good way to focus it. And also it ties into what the review period is going to be. If you're going to have a team review these in a week, then you better not have anything open-ended, or people are going to get burnt out.
Yeah, really good thought there, Ken. Thank you. Sam.
So again, just suggestions from being involved in these RFPs. The cover letter usually gets 0 points or is noted as pass fail. So oftentimes, and maybe this is other words in the document, you have to say how long your proposal is open for. Does a person who has authority has it been signed by a person who has authority to bind the bidder? And any other any other things that are important there. You just make that pass fail. And then B and C are just the C really is, it's not experiences. Maybe this is what was meant. It is experience with other SMMPs in the last, and I'm making this up, in the last 5 years. You know, you don't want someone who's did an SMMP in 1873. It's not going to be, you know, relevant. So it would be with, and then the cost issue, you know, I agree with everything that has been said. And there are two approaches to this, and it's up to you to think which one is best for this particular fuss. The upside of having cost in there is you get a concrete idea of what they think is going to happen. And so you can, looking at whatever budget you have, then have something to push against. The downside of having cost weighted as 5%, 10%, 20%, what have you, is that you get this anomaly that the best proposal from a substantive perspective costs more money and therefore gets lower points for cost. And then you've shot yourself in the foot by, you know, assigning points to these things. And so you just have to consider, you know, what's the better part of valor from your perspective. Some people, some approaches, and I'm not making a recommendation, I'm just giving you options, is that you don't have cost in the point system, and you rate everything that except cost. You pick your top 5, and then maybe as a result of the interviews or subsequent presentations, then at the final round of reevaluating the top 5 or 3, whatever it is, then you factor in cost. And people will say things like, so round 2 is performance in interview, and I'm just, again, making things up, 35 points. Responsiveness to questions asked, 25 points, then cost, whatever the balance is at that point. So you can then, you're doing a almost a benefit cost analysis at that point. You've got 3 good proposals and they're priced differently. What is the benefit cost? And then you score the cost at the end as part of the final decision. Again, simply one approach, not the definitive approach, not a recommendation, just an option.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I know this came up briefly the last time, and we talked about, I think somebody, maybe Ryan, somebody made the point of, you know, the verbiage of reasonableness of cost proposal seemed to treat this well in terms of almost wrapping the cost benefit analysis in the cost kind of criteria. But I wanted to see if the group thought that sort of covers it, or if Sam's approach makes more sense of, and not Sam's approach, but the idea that Sam brought up is kind of regarding them at 2 different stages of the process. Yeah, Ryan.
Yeah, to Sam's point, I've seen both, you know, and responded to both. And you know, just maybe a thought, you know, that's similar to where Sam is going for consideration is, you know, sometimes what happens is the review committee is not given the cost. The cost proposal is submitted with the RFP, and then it is held back, and then the review committee goes through and reviews everything, and then from there, then it's like, okay, we picked our top 3. Now all of a sudden the cost comes in, and then you can further rate it. And so that's another option upon kind of what Sam was talking about.
Thank you, Ryan. Any other thoughts on that? I'm just going to jot that idea down of leaving the costs out until the initial review is completed. And I think that could be a good approach, even if you're using this reasonableness idea. Maybe leaving the costs out for that first review is helpful, just to make sure that you're getting the most complete applications that'll kind of do what you need the work to include. All right. Is there anything that we see missing from this that we'd assume? We covered costs and kind of calling that out. Anything else that we can imagine at this glance being something that we should include here as sort of a deliverable that the applicant would send to the county when they're going out for this RFP?
Well, the one thing that we talked about, and just because I raised it doesn't mean it needs to be in there, but you have to decide to what extent are you going to have a section with points allocated to social responsibility, corporate responsibility, sustainability, hiring, disadvantaged workers and that sort of thing as a specific criteria. Otherwise, it's just a, gosh, it would be great if you were equitable. Well, that doesn't give you anything. They're not going to be motivated unless they get, from a Machiavellian perspective, they're not going to be motivated unless they know, hey, you get, again, making it up, 20 points if you have a diversified work team.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. And I'll also go through those notes that we took earlier and make sure anything that we noted makes it into either this section or wherever it makes more sense. But thanks for making sure that we had that added here. That's a really good point. And I'll also try to go through and see how these selection criteria relate to this component section here. And to Sam's point, maybe things that aren't listed as a scored criteria, we could include as sort of the pass-fail concept. I've seen that done in other RFPs. So I'll do my best to sort of roll that into one, so that way we're not looking at two things. We should be looking at sort of the components of the application and how they score. So I'll try my best to roll that into one for our next review here. All right, so we're coming down to 10 minutes to go. I think we should review the topics between meetings. I essentially took the topics that we've already nailed down. I did my best to add them into, or transpose them into questions. You can compare the chart to the questions below. And it was actually a really great exercise to sort of weed out the little items that aren't really meaningful to the, what's the point of this section here? What are we hoping to answer? So if you have a chance, you could even kind of do that transposing process yourself and see if you come up with anything. But I was really trying to approach it as well with the idea, what's the point of this? What's the big picture question if we were to ask an RFP to answer for us, and making sure that shows up in each section. Or I put a general section in there for all the things that really were kind of widely applicable to the entire plan, or maybe every component of the plan. But I know it's a big list, so I think we should review that offline. But any questions or thoughts before we move into this key recommendations, key findings piece? All right, hearing none. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the key recommendations and key findings. Thanks for going through this with me. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Sorry about the delay. Okay, so what I did here, I haven't added content yet, but essentially we're at the key findings and key recommendations as items that we're going to take out of the draft report that we're just reviewing and put into the work groups report that Sam will include in draft number 2 for the work group. So I included each of the major charge areas. And the idea is that we should be trying to pull out key findings and key recommendations for each. I think our charge is interesting because it's relatively on the brief side. And we have a fair amount of key findings for each charge element already, but some of them are a little bit detailed, like the table of contents or the questions. So for some of these elements, I can imagine subjects to be covered. We might say, that the key finding is that we came up with a list of subjects that we think should be covered, and the recommendation is for the contractor to be considering that list of topics to develop the plan. But just any feedback I can get from the group in adding to this and characterizing the work that we've done in the terms of key findings and key recommendations, I think would be really helpful for me. Like I said, I'm going to be filling this out today just to get over to Sam for this next round. I'm going to do it as best as I can, but any thoughts or ideas that come up, please let me know. John.
I just jotted down some thoughts, and I'm apologize because I think we were supposed to try to get these to you before today. But I was just looking at kind of the different things at the head of this RF, the table of contents, and a couple is, like a finding I have is that this kind of, I think, addresses subjects to be covered perhaps, but the charges of the total work group, the trash talking work group, all those charges are intimately related and are included within this RFP. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you bring up there.
All right, and then another one, these are more recommendations, that recruitment and recruitment needs to be extensive, recruitment of proposers, and selection of the successful proposer should be careful and thorough. And yeah, I mean, that might be very obvious, but and then I put high priorities on for recommendations, that we need to emphasize the impacts of the results of the RFP on social equity, on innovation, to understand and emphasize the upstream aspects of material sustainability, and I kind of mentioned innovation. This is along those lines, but creative solutions that provide pathways for tangible outcomes, long-term outcomes, I should say.
Excellent. Any other items to include in key recommendations or key findings, John?
Not at the moment.
Thank you so much.
I will look at your outline though. But if you're putting it together, what I'd rather do is see what you put together. And I'm just throwing this out, but see what you put together, and then we can react to that, maybe add.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll try to get that up probably today, because I want to send something over to Sam as soon as possible. So I'm going to try to get that up, hopefully by the end of the day. So it'll be kind of an additional document on our subcommittee webpage. I'll post it in PDF and Word docs so you can easily go in and edit and send me any notes or thoughts you have. Yeah, Sam.
So in similar projects, one of these recommendations or key focus points, piling on with what John said, is that you're looking for, I would think you're looking for adaptability, future adaptability, the adaptive management that, you know, we're going to know next year, we're going to know more about this than we do this year and every subsequent year. God willing, the science evolves and the understanding the new technologies evolve. So something that talks about that you're going to engage in adaptive management. It sets the stage for ongoing adaptive management and refinement as we go through it, and not just say as of, you know, June 5th of 2023, that's the end of our plan. And maybe even in the where you talk about in the section we just covered about approach, maybe even there it also should say, you know, please discuss or please provide your input on how this thing is going to be adaptively managed over the course of its evolution.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Sam. So I included that here, ongoing adaptive management and refinement. I'm not sure it's the best spot for it, but I also included the note that we should add that to the larger document. So I'm going to do that as well. Am I getting a good thumbs up from the group on that? Yeah, I think that makes sense to me too. Excellent. Thank you, Sam. I also am recognizing that our list of sort of considerations for a successful applicant, that ranges so much good information. And I think a lot of those are going to sort of fall into different categories of key findings and key recommendations. I think mostly on the recommendation side. So I'm going to do my best to incorporate that here as well. So just stay tuned. But I think as we go through that list, I think you'll notice that there's a lot of kind of essentially recommendations on what this should look like, the process should look like, the applicant should look like. So I'm going to do my best to capture that. But I just wanted to give us all a shout out that we've been doing this work. It's a lot of it is there, and we're moving along really nicely. All right, so it's 12 or 2:29. Any final thoughts as I leave you with the sort of to-do of reviewing the questions version of the subjects to be covered? Essentially just making sure that it's really answering the question to you, does this get to the heart of what this topic is about? So that's the one item, and then going through this key recommendations and key findings. I'm going to post my draft of it today online. So if you can, just go through it. Let me know if I'm capturing everything correctly, or if you have any additions or items to edit, please just feel free to send that over to me. We have another meeting next week. I think it's not on Thursday, but Wednesday, the day before our work group meeting. So just remember to join us for that one. Yeah, Sam.
And on that point of your next meeting, please consider the agenda in part being, what are you all going to present and ask the work group as a whole about at the Thursday, I think it's the 19th meeting. So, you know, maybe, again, thinking out loud, maybe pick 3 topics here that you want more feedback on or insight on, and tee those up for the full work group to comment. But bottom line is, just please make sure next week's subcommittee meeting has a section on preparing for the January 19th work group meeting, your 45 minutes of fame, so to speak.
Thanks, Sam. And we posted that agenda, so we'll update it to include that on that as an agenda item. All right. So just one quick comment on the key findings and key recommendations. Once we start narrowing down the information into this format, I think it really helps kind of stimulate all the thinking about these topics, and it really helps us get to the point of what the subcommittee is doing. Really helps us focus in on, you know, what are we getting to, what is the recommendation for this item of the charge. So feel free to kind of go back to that key findings, key recommendations, almost as a blank slate, and just use it as a thinking tool as well, because maybe you'll be able to capture things that we haven't had a chance to really discuss in this subcommittee yet. So I just wanted to add that as a potential aid in going through this exercise. All right, well, that's all. Any last comments? Hearing none. Thanks, everyone.
Wait,
Oh,
just
yep, sorry. Go for it, Sam.
is it possible you can, Maren and you and I can talk for just like 5 minutes after you end this recording and let everyone else? It's
Yeah, I'll give you a call on. I'll just do it on a Teams meeting, but I'll give you a call.
all right. Thank you all.
All right. Thanks, everyone.